So I had a moment of coincidence earlier this week. I had been planning this series out for several months, and I had prepared the message for today without even thinking about what day of the month I was going to be doing this. I knew it was going to be Palm Sunday, but I didn't really look at the real calendar to figure out when Palm Sunday fell. So I had written this whole outline out, and I was looking at it earlier this week when I got a notification on my phone. It was one of those, here's what you were doing last year kind of things. And last year, this past week, I was up in Old Forge watching the eclipse. And I was reading in my notes that I wanted to talk about watching the eclipse this Sunday. And I wanted to talk about how, while standing there watching it, I had felt this sense of wonder. I think that happens in moments in life when we realize maybe how small we are. That in the grand scheme of all that is and was and ever will be, we occupy such a small space in all things. Our grandest accomplishments sometimes end up looking so terribly small in comparison to how big our world is. These were the thoughts that were going through my mind as I was watching the eclipse last year. And I wanted to know if other people experienced a sense of wonder while watching an eclipse as well. So luckily for me, somebody else had actually done the research on that. Back in 2017, you remember there was that eclipse that covered most of the continental US, and researchers looked into how people's language changed after witnessing the eclipse. And what they did was they looked at people's Twitter accounts. This was before Twitter was owned by a crazy person. And they looked at the kinds of words people used when they tweeted about things. And they looked at people who were inside the zone of totality and people who were outside, but they also looked at how people wrote words before the eclipse and after the eclipse. And they noticed that people who were in the zone of totality after the eclipse were more likely to use words like we and us, as opposed to people outside the zone of totality who continued to use words like I and me. It was a subtle shift they noticed, but maybe it tells us that there are certain occurrences in life that serve to help remind us of our interconnectedness with one another, even if it is as simple as a subtle change in language from thinking about I to thinking about we. You see, I think wonder helps reframe how we view the world. I think it also helps us reframe how we view our place in the world. And there are occurrences, things we can do to help facilitate that. I talk about witnessing an eclipse as one way to do that, but I've also experienced that walking down the streets of a 2,000-year-old city, a sense of wonder. Or as I watch a powerful musical, or standing on the rim of the Grand Canyon, things we can do that put us in a place where we can experience a profound sense of wonder. Maybe you call it something different. I kept going back and using the word awe to describe these moments as well, but I like that idea of wonder. To experience wonder, we have got to be open to experiences we otherwise would not have. A couple of years ago, Heather and I traveled out west and we flew into Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and we drove to Seattle. And part of that trip was spending a couple of days in Yellowstone. And I think just about the last thing we did was we stopped at what's called the Artist's Paint Pots, this geological activity that has created this bubbling formation of color all over the ground. It looks like little paint pots in the ground. And to get to the artist paint pots, we had to not only get to Yellowstone, but we also had to wait in about 45 minutes of traffic because the parking lot was pretty small to get to these paint pots. And then we had to take a short hike into the woods of the park to get to where you could see this feature. As we were leaving, I had to do some necessary business in the restroom, and there was another line there, of course. So I'm waiting there in line, and I overhear a conversation of these people who had just come in from California. They had just sat through that 45 minutes of traffic waiting to get to this place, and they were now there waiting for the rest of their group to go, and one of the people speaks to somebody that was just finishing this trail and says, "Was it worth it?" And the response was, it was okay. So this person who had taken a trip from California to Yellowstone, waited 45 minutes in traffic, decided they were just going to wait in the car for other people to do this. Now, you can't always tell somebody else's disability, but this person appeared to be fully capable of walking maybe the half mile to see these paint pots, and I had trouble imagining how you could decide to go all this way and miss seeing something of wonder. Every once in a while, we need to do those things that remind us of how small, how fragile our lives are in the grand scheme of time and space and the human race. Today is Palm Sunday. Today is one of those days of wonder. Normally, today would be a great day to talk about Jesus' triumphal entry into the city of Jerusalem. I could talk to you about the symbolism of riding a donkey instead of the majestic steeds. Or I could talk about the chants of Hosanna from a crowd that would soon sour and cry, "Crucify." But instead today, I want to talk about a character in the story who seemed to be open to an experience of wonder. I want to talk about the owner of the colt that Jesus rode into the city of Jerusalem. And I want to ask the question, why did this man say yes? If I owned a colt and a couple people came to me saying, "Hey, we just need to borrow him for a couple of hours so, our friend can ride him into the city. It's all symbolic. We'll return him, don't worry." I would think they were nuts. And I would say, find somebody else. The owner of the colt says yes. And that fascinates me. I don't know why he says yes. We're not told why he says yes. It could have to do with prophecy. Maybe prophecy forces him to say yes. We have this prophecy from Zechariah that the king would ride into Jerusalem on the back of a donkey, on the foal of a colt. Maybe he's forced to because of that prophecy, but I don't think prophecy works that way. I don't think prophecy forces us to do anything. Maybe there's another reason. I like Matthew's account of this story. We heard it from Luke, but I really like Matthew's account of this story because Matthew doesn't understand how the Hebrew language works. So Matthew writes almost verbatim that Zechariah prophecy and imagines Jesus riding not only a donkey, but also a colt. So in Matthew's imagination, Jesus is like some circus performer riding two animals at the same time. I imagine 1 foot on each, riding into Jerusalem because Matthew doesn't understand how Zechariah was riding. But Luke gets it right. This is just one animal that Jesus is riding in. But the question is, why does the owner say yes? If he isn't driven by prophecy, what compels him to say, "Jesus, borrow my colt"? And I come to think that maybe that was just his personality. Maybe he's one of those people who just says yes when asked for something. Several years back, there was a Jim Carrey movie called Yes Man, where Jim Carrey would say yes to everything that was presented to him. And it sends him on this wonderful adventure. And I think there maybe have been a romance in there somewhere. I wasn't paying attention. But the idea of a character who would always say yes to everything inspired some people to mimic that. Everything okay upstairs? All right. Sorry, there's a lot of banging up there. People were inspired by this movie, and particularly a man by the name of, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, but Alex Camille tried to follow this pattern by starting to say yes when people asked him to do something. And it led him on his own adventure. But it also led him to coming up with a philosophy that he calls a yes man philosophy. And to sum it up, that philosophy is that we often try to skirt around our problems and fears, but that saying yes to things will actually lead us to better and more fulfilling lives. Saying yes to things we may otherwise have said no to can open us up to experiences we never would have had otherwise, and can help us enter into moments of wonder that we otherwise would have missed. I like that idea. I like that idea that at some point we have to be willing to open ourselves to experience a sense of wonder. It's something we can cultivate. We can put ourselves in a pattern of life where we cultivate these moments. Several years ago, I was part of a program that had me driving 80 miles to our conference offices once a month. And the easiest way to do that was to hop on I-90 and get there in about an hour and a half. Would not do it. Driving on the interstate is one of the most boring things I can think of possibly doing, so I would always take Route 20 out to Liverpool. Because I wanted to see life happening around me. It was like 7 o'clock in the morning, but there was still life to be seen happening on that drive. And the first few months it went fine. The first few months we started this, I think, in like July and August went fine. But come September, as I'm driving along, I get stuck behind a school bus. You know, I start fuming. Like, this bus stops at like every single house, and every single kid seems to be running out last minute to catch the bus. And I'm sitting there going, come on, I'm gonna be late. Why can't these kids be ready on time? Even though as a kid, I was never ready on time. Okay, as an adult, I'm never ready on time either. But I found myself in a state of mind where I had tried to cultivate this sense of wonder, but I was getting so frustrated that I wasn't experiencing it. So I had to reframe my thinking. I had to remind myself that I took the slower road for a reason, because I wanted to see life happening around me. And when I was able to reframe the thinking, I sat there waiting for a kid to climb on the school bus, and I actually got to sit there and watch life happen around me. A moment of wonder take place. Sometimes all it is reframing the way we think to cultivate those experiences of wonder. I know I talked a lot about going places to do this. I talked about going up to see the eclipse or going out to Yellowstone. I've gone places to experience wonder. I've walked in ancient cities in the Middle East. I've stood in magnificent vistas and contemplated the grand scheme of all things. But we don't need to go anywhere to do this, really. We can do this sitting at home. Sometimes it just takes rethinking how we're entering the world. Sometimes it means putting the screen away, looking out the window. Sometimes it takes just a moment to rethink how we want to enter the world. So what does wonder have to do with community? All of Lent, we have been talking about these qualities of healthy, vibrant communities. And we're going to end it by saying that wonder is one of the qualities that we need to find in a healthy and vibrant community. But I don't think it's just another ingredient of community. So far, if you recall, we've talked about communities needing to have gratitude, empathy, acceptance of others, compassion for the hurting, and selfless love. Wonder is not just another quality of a healthy community. Wonder is something that needs to be present in the midst of all of the other aspects of the community, reminding us to open ourselves to possibility all around us, to open ourselves to one another, to invite new opportunities and new possibilities in our lives, to ask if we have created space for the unexpected and the moment of awe, because so often, if we don't do it intentionally, we forget to see wonder. So I have a lot of colleagues who have instituted God sightings in their weekly worship services. So during church, they would take a few moments out to pass a microphone around and ask people to name where they've seen God. And I was just talking to one of my friends a couple weeks ago who said that they had started this, and so often they just have a few moments of silence in worship because no one wants to talk. But when God's sightings are done right, you can hear amazing stories. A lot of times it'll start off with, oh, I saw God in that beautiful sunset last night, or oh, I saw God in that cute little animal that went through my backyard this morning. But as people get more comfortable with paying attention to where God is, you soon start to hear things like, I saw God when my dad got diagnosed with inoperable cancer. I saw God when my depression wasn't so debilitating on Thursday morning that I actually got out of bed. I saw God when I went downtown and helped distribute food to the needy. These God sightings, if you let them get pretty deep sometimes. I want to kind of play with that idea. I wanted us to think not necessarily of God sightings, but of wonder sightings. Places where we have seen, witnessed, been open to something wondrous happening in our midst. I go around town, I see so many people going so many places, not paying any attention to the world around them, and I wonder if we have missed out on so many wonderful things in our midst. I wonder what would happen if we paid attention to wonder sightings as a community. So not next week. Next week is Easter and everything's going to be crazy. But the week after, I'm going to open up time in our worship services for people to share where they have seen wonder in their lives. In fact, our whole Easter season here at First is going to be about the idea of wonder. And we're going to be talking about the wonder of resurrection, and we're going to have it in conversation with the wonder of creation, and then we're going to be invited to experience wonder for ourselves. So be on the lookout. Be on the lookout for those experiences, those moments when you say, that's wonder right there. And it can be majestic, but it also can be as simple as watching a child climb on a school bus. Wonder teaches us about our place in the grand scheme of the history of the universe. Wonder teaches us that we are all in this amazing thing called life together. Wonder teaches us a profound lesson of our own vulnerabilities, our own limitations, our own shortcomings. And then wonder comes around and teaches us again that we are all of us in this together. In a sense, we're all we've got. And that sounds like a pretty good excuse to me to start focusing on living in healthy and vibrant community together. Because if I'm all you've got, if you're all I've got, and we're all in this together, and we're all meeting the struggles of life together, and we are all going through the busyness and the pain and the hurt and the joy and the exuberation, if we're all going through it all together, why not do it in a community that cares for one another? Why not do it in a community that says all are welcome, all are needed, all are of value, all deserve to have a moment of experiencing wonder together. Let's be in an attitude of prayer. So long ago, oh God, simple Colt, what we might call a beast of burden, what the owner of that colt may have called a priceless treasure, reminds us to see wonder, to be open to wonder, to be vulnerable to wonder together. Lord, help our communities foster ideas, moments, times of profound wonder together. And help us on our journey towards Gethsemane to be a people always on the lookout for the wonder that happens around us. I pray this in Christ's holy and blessed name. Amen.